Hi everybody, welcome back to Trauma Camp for Teachers. This is episode number 34, the 6 core components of trauma. Now, I first want to say that so much of what I do is helping people actually just understand the experience of trauma for themselves or in the people they love or in the people that they work with. I often say that about 50% of healing from trauma is understanding what's actually happening, because without understanding what's happening, it's so easy to feel like something's fundamentally wrong or broken, or to feel confused about why you're doing, what the big reaction is, what needs to be done to help you feel safe again. And so this episode is all about helping you understand these 6 core components of trauma. And my job as a trauma therapist and trauma trainer is to take all this high-level information and distill it down into really approachable and understandable bite-sized nuggets. So this is all what this whole episode is about. And I actually didn't develop these core components. Dr. Judith Herman did. She wrote the book Trauma and Recovery, and she's one of the leading researchers in the field of specifically complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is different from classic post-traumatic stress disorder. CPTSD, as it's known, isn't officially included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM as we call it in my field. But the way that these things ultimately get introduced into the DSM is by researchers like Dr. Herman, developing these criteria based on research and basically pitching it to the committee that agrees upon what goes into the DSM. So the DSM is something that's evolving, but regardless of it not yet being in the DSM, it is something that has really entered into the field as a very useful identifier of something that differentiates itself from classic post-traumatic stress disorder. And so these are Dr. Herman's 6 criteria, 6 core components of trauma. And when I used to work at a treatment center in Southern California, in Los Angeles, I was the lead therapist, and I was building out their trauma treatment component of the program. And this was a dual diagnosis treatment center, and what that means is that people are dealing with multiple things, not just I'm here getting sober, but I'm here working on my alcoholism and my trauma, or I have an eating disorder and OCD, or I have severe depression and a gambling addiction. There are multiple things that a person is dealing with in these kind of treatment centers. And so the vein of trauma was something that I was really building out into my work with clients and into the programming. And like I said, a lot of the programming had to do with simply educating the clients. And so what I did one day is I drew this gingerbread person up on the whiteboard, and I just wrote out these 6 core components. And in that group with all of those clients, we went around identifying experiences that hit each of these components in their lives. And then we took that gingerbread person and drew all these lines over to the other side of the whiteboard that was left blank. And from there, we started to identify the 6 core components of safety. So this episode is part 1 in a 2-part series. This is the 6 core components of trauma, and the next episode is going to be the 6 core components of safety. And it all stems from that group I led at the treatment facility, where we started to work with this in real time to help the clients start to understand what they were going through. And from that, start to understand and identify what they needed to recover and feel safe again. And my hope for you is not just as teachers, but as human beings, you start hearing these 6 core components of trauma and are able to give validation and understanding to maybe some of the things you've experienced in your life, or experiences a loved one has had, or experiences your students have had. And so without further ado, I want to dive into Dr. Judith Herman's 6 core components of trauma. So the first experience that makes something traumatic is the experience of powerlessness. So powerlessness is the experience of having your agency or your own personal control taken away from you, stripped of you. And it is very disorienting. It can be very destabilizing. And for someone who's experienced trauma before in this way and had that core experience, even small moves to take away a person's choice or experience can really tap into that overwhelming experience of powerlessness, that traumatic experience. And so that's when you might make a decision for a student, or you might tell them what to do, and you see this big response or big shutdown. And that might be a small indicator of, oh, this person has experienced a more severe form of powerlessness. I don't know what it is necessarily, but I'm being cued in this moment to take that seriously and to try to start restoring agency and kind of support them around this experience. The second core component of trauma is overwhelm. It is an experience that is absolutely overwhelming to the senses. It may feel so big or like so much that it's actually too much to process in the moment. One of the kind of loose definitions I use with people around trauma is it's such a big experience, it's too much to process in that moment. So if you were to tell me, Julia, I got a haircut today, that is not affecting multiple layers of my life, and I can kind of process and be there with you in that moment. It's not traumatic to me. If you say, Julia, I stole your car and crashed it into a ditch, that's now affecting multiple layers of my relationship with you, and how I understand safety, how I understand trust, how I understand our relationship. So that might be a bigger experience to digest. And if it's too big to digest in the moment, like it's too much for your system to do, then that usually becomes a traumatic experience. The third core component of trauma is terror. Now, oftentimes when we talk about terror, we're talking about terrorism. So the big collective experiences of terror. And those are traumatic experiences. There are also not collective, but more individualized or more personalized forms of terror, such as terror in the home, or terror in a school, or terror in a church or synagogue, or any religious institution, or a sports team, or any experience where you become terrified for your safety, your bodily or emotional integrity. Those are experiences that can ignite a feeling of terror. And usually terrifying experiences can result in experiencing trauma in your body. The fourth core component of trauma is disconnection. It is safe and consistent and supportive relationships that fundamentally keep humans alive and keep us going despite what we have experienced. And any rupture or severing to those relationships that result in disconnection is one of the greatest alarms to send to the human nervous system. It is so terrifying to have those ruptures and be suddenly burdened with dealing with whatever that experience is by yourself, without the support of a loving, caring partner, adult, friend, family member, community member, professional, whatever it is. But also the experience of disconnection itself can be deeply, deeply traumatizing. The fifth core component is unpredictability. So even in situations where there is chronic stress or chronic fear, if there is a level of predictability to those experiences, that person will fare much better than the person with whom they have to face the unpredictability of those experiences. So to use an example, if I know that once a month dad goes out and he gets really drunk with his buddies and he comes home and he's really aggressive and really abusive to my mom, and that happens once a month. It's usually at the end of the month when he gets his paycheck, and I know when that is coming. I know that there's a beginning, middle, and end, and it's still extremely stressful. It still may be traumatic, but it is to some degree predictable. And that predictability is helpful to my nervous system in allowing me to manage how I respond to that scary thing. Whereas if dad's drinking and getting drunk and going out with his buddies and coming home and being verbally or physically abusive to my mom happens whenever. He could have a good day and it leads to that. He could have a bad day and it leads to that. It could be a Friday, it could be a Sunday, it could be a Tuesday. That level of unpredictability creates a heightened state in the nervous system that essentially teaches me to have to be on guard all of the time. And so my vigilance becomes a hypervigilance, and it creates an extra layer of stress in the system to where I am always on the lookout because I don't know when the threat is coming. And the sixth and final component of trauma is experiencing hopelessness. And this is where I have lost any belief that a solution or improvement is coming or is available to me. And when a traumatic circumstance has been prolonged and perhaps unchanging, and so what might start as an initial hit of violation or threat or whatever slowly becomes a chronic issue, and that leads someone to feeling hopeless. So what I really want you to do is I want you to think about these core components in the context of two things, yourself and your students. So for yourself, I want you to be thinking about these 6 core components and starting to track what of my experiences have had any of these features. Have I had experiences that have left me feeling hopeless and overwhelmed? Have I had experiences that have been terrifying and left me feeling powerless? Have I had experiences that have led to disconnection and unpredictability? And as you're doing that, I know this is, a podcast and I can't be there with you helping you track, but I do want you to bring awareness to what's going on inside of your body. Even if you're noticing that you can't be in your body, like you feel too disconnected, or you just can't sit still, or you feel really numb, like that's also tracking your body. And so I want to encourage you to do that as well. But when it comes to your students, I want you to be thinking of not just holding space for all the areas in their life when they might be experiencing powerlessness, overwhelm, terror, disconnection, unpredictability, or hopelessness, right? But also starting to bring curiosity to, are there ways that I or my school are contributing to these feelings, to these experiences for these students? Do I go into what has been a really normal practice for a lot of adults with children of threatening disconnection if they don't do what I say, right? So it's time to leave the park, or it's time to leave the playground. Oh, you're not coming? Okay, well, I'm gonna leave you, right? It might seem really benign because it's been so habitual for a lot of us adults to hear that language, experience that language, and then start to employ that as adults. But using this lens of, oh, I'm actually threatening disconnection, and it ignites a fear response in that student. And that fear response is what is compelling them to comply with my direction or order. And what residue is that fear response leaving in my student's body and in our relationship together now that I'm threatening this experience of disconnection? Or are there ways that I am contributing to a feeling of powerlessness for my students with me, right? If we are walking down the hallway and I keep grabbing their arm and kind of pulling them towards me in a very abrupt or maybe even aggressive way, am I respecting the agency and autonomy of their body? And this actually becomes a little bit, there's some tricky area here with kids, like for instance, you're not going to completely respect the agency and autonomy of a child who's running into the street, right? And so there are ways that we sometimes have to intervene, but this is a process of getting to be really honest with ourselves about like, how important is this, right? How important is this that I am intervening with this child's body right now? Are they a threat to themselves? Are they a threat to me? Are they a threat to others? If it's not any of those three, I really, really encourage you to be reassessing or looking at the ways in which you might be contributing to a feeling of powerlessness in a student. Also, even if you're not contributing to these experiences with a student, you still have the opportunity to give them reparative or restorative experiences. And so one of the ways I do this with my younger students and, my older students, teens, I'm calling them students, but they're my clients. But I also did work at a therapeutic preschool, so they were my students then, but also clients too. But one of the ways I'll do this with any of the kids I'm working with, young or adolescent, is I will find ways to volley them choice and decisions, even if I already know how to do a thing. And so, for instance, that might be, asking for tech advice on my phone, or asking a child to come help me set up the projector or this particular thing, or, hey, I need this box moved over here. Would you be willing to come help me with that? It's okay if it's a no. And always prefacing with, it's okay if it's a no. I'd really like your help, and it's okay if it's a no. So you're literally starting to teach them that they have permission to make a choice here. And for someone who's experienced powerlessness before, this is huge. This is a game changer, right? You're really restoring that sense of, I have a right to choose what happens with me and my body. And for children, it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area here. But what we want to do is be restoring that opportunity inside a child as much as possible, whether they've been traumatized or not, actually. So again, these are the 6 core components of experiencing trauma: powerlessness, overwhelm, terror, disconnection, unpredictability, and hopelessness. And so I'm really hopeful that this is helping you think in a different way about trauma, helping you understand these experiences differently, and also in a deeper way, and helping you start to apply this information, not just to your students' lives, but to your life as well. All right, that's it for the episode, and I can't wait to walk you through the opposite of this in next week's episode, the 6 core components of safety. All right, bye for now.